Welcome back to the deep dive, where we take a deep dive into the subjects you really want to know more about. Today, it's the Jeffrey Epstein Files. Yeah, the ones everyone's been buzzing about. We're going to cut through all that noise, though, and get to the heart of it.
Yeah.
What's actually in these documents, who they're connected to, and why it all matters, especially now.
Well, these files are really a gold mine, a glimpse into Epstein's world and the people he knew. Basically, they're court documents, right? Stemming from a defamation case against Ghislaine Maxwell, filed by Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's victims. The thing is, they were unsealed after Epstein's death and Annie Maxwell's conviction.
So, new information, potentially.
Yeah.
What exactly are we talking about when we say these files?
It's a massive amount of stuff. Flight logs from his private plane, statements from witnesses, communication records, even his contact book. This stuff could really illuminate how far his network reached and what was really going on.
You mentioned some pretty big names in these files. Can you give us some specifics?
Yeah, the list is long, and it's got people from all walks of life, politicians, business tycoons, celebrities, even royalty. We're seeing names like Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, Bill Gates, Richard Branson.
It's important to say, though, just because their names are there, it doesn't automatically mean they did anything wrong.
Absolutely. No, these files don't hand us proof of any criminal activity on their part. But they do put these people in Epstein's circle, so it raises questions, right? What did they know about his alleged activities? What was their relationship with him, really?
That's an interesting point. So what happens to these people named? Could there be legal trouble, or is it more about, like, bad press?
Criminal charges, at this point, unlikely, but they're under a microscope, that's for sure. And yeah, potential damage to their reputations is a big deal. People are asking, what did they know? When did they know it? And if they did know, did they do anything about it?
I've noticed that a lot of the individuals mentioned haven't said anything since these documents came out.
True. Some have denied everything, saying they had no idea about Epstein's crimes or that they only knew him professionally. But a lot have chosen to stay quiet, which, it's understandable, but it does make people speculate even more. And it might make it harder to really get to the bottom of Epstein's network and what it all means.
The documents paint a pretty disturbing picture of how Epstein operated.
Hmm.
Can you walk us through it? How did it work? And how did he get away with it for so long?
Well, from what we see, Epstein and Maxwell, they ran things almost like a pyramid scheme. They'd lure in young girls, often from tough backgrounds, with promises, money, modeling careers, education, a better life. Then they'd use these girls to recruit others, expanding their network.
It's just awful thinking about how they preyed on these women, took advantage of them, what made it so effective, their system.
A few things, really. They targeted vulnerable people desperate for a way out, and they created this atmosphere, very secretive, intimidating, made it hard for victims to come forward.
And this operation, which I understand started in Palm Beach, Florida, it eventually became this international sex trafficking network. There's been a lot of talk about Epstein's private plane, the Lolita Express. What role did that play in all of this?
The Lolita Express, yeah. Sadly, it was a key part of moving these girls around, both within the U.S. and to other countries. The flight logs are pretty damning. They back up what the victims have said, and they show us how Epstein used his money and his connections to commit these crimes.
He seemed to operate without any fear of consequences for a long time. Was anyone trying to stop him before that 2019 arrest?
Actually, yeah. Maria Farmer, one of his victims, reported him to the FBI way back in 1996. She said she was assaulted and that she saw him with other underage girls.
That's over 2 decades before he was finally arrested. Were there any other investigations, too?
Oh, yeah. There were more police investigations, and in 2008, he was even convicted in Florida, charges related to soliciting prostitution from a minor.
So the authorities were aware of him for a long time. How on earth was he able to just keep going, even after a conviction?
That's one of the most baffling parts of this whole thing. It seems like a few things came together to let him avoid real consequences for years. That plea deal in 2008, which was really lenient and shielded him from much more serious federal charges, his wealth and his connections, and maybe even failures by law enforcement and the justice system. We really have to acknowledge how brave these victims are for coming forward, especially when it involves powerful people like Epstein. They face so much pressure, people don't believe them. Sometimes there are even threats.
It's a tough reminder that this can happen anywhere, to anyone,
Yeah.
no matter your social status, how much money you have. And it shows us how crucial it is to create a safe space for victims so they can speak out and get justice.
Exactly. We have to get away from this culture of silence, blaming the victim. We need to focus on support, believing them, and holding the abusers accountable.
The Epstein case has really shown how complicated power dynamics can be, how they can be used to manipulate and take advantage of people. Can you talk about the role of wealth and social influence in all of this? How did Epstein get away with it for so long?
Oh, there's no doubt that his money and connections gave him this feeling that he was untouchable. He was able to build relationships with powerful people, create this network of, well, enablers, and silence his victims.
It's disturbing to think that someone could use wealth and influence to avoid facing the consequences for such horrible crimes. Do you think law enforcement or the legal system failed in any way to address this sooner?
There have definitely been questions raised about potential failures at different levels. That plea deal he got in 2008 has been under a lot of scrutiny. It let him avoid much more serious charges at the federal level, and it might have even protected others who were involved.
So there's a feeling that even with the conviction, justice wasn't really served.
Right. A lot of people feel like that 2008 plea deal was a complete travesty. It meant Epstein didn't serve much time, and it probably stopped a much deeper investigation into his network.
And those failures, it seems like they've led to a much stronger demand for accountability now.
Oh, absolutely. The public wants answers. They want to know how this went on for so long, who else was involved, and why those who helped him weren't held responsible.
Looking beyond the legal stuff, the Epstein case has started some bigger conversations about social responsibility, ethical behavior. What are your thoughts on that?
This whole case has forced us to face some uncomfortable truths about the potential for abuse within systems of power and privilege. It reminds us that we need to be vigilant to hold people and institutions accountable, no matter how powerful they are.
And it's a call to action for all of us, right?
Sure.
To be aware of these power dynamics and to speak up against any kind of exploitation or abuse that we see.
Exactly. We all have a part to play in creating a fairer society where power is used responsibly and where vulnerable people are protected.
This case has gotten a lot of media attention, which makes sense given the high-profile people involved. But what about the impact of all this coverage on the victims?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance. Media coverage is important to raise awareness, bring attention to issues like sexual abuse, but it's crucial to do it in a way that doesn't hurt the victims, that avoids sensationalizing or exploiting their trauma.
So responsible reporting is key in cases like this. How can we make sure that happens?
Well, journalists need to prioritize the well-being and privacy of the victims. Avoid publishing graphic details that could be re-traumatizing, and focus on providing accurate and informative reporting that respects the dignity of those involved.
It's also important to be mindful of the potential legal stuff, with ongoing investigations, and to avoid publishing things that could interfere with due process.
Absolutely. Responsible reporting means balancing the public's right to know with the rights of the individuals involved, especially the victims.
The Epstein case has also sparked some debate about the role of wealth and philanthropy. How do you see those factors intersecting with the issues we've been talking about?
Well, Epstein definitely used his wealth to get into influential circles, to create this image of respectability. His philanthropy, while maybe genuine in some cases, also, helped him boost his image and deflect any criticism.
It really raises questions about how we judge the motivations behind philanthropy, right? Whether it can be used to cover up bad behavior.
For sure. We have to be more careful when we're evaluating people and organizations involved in philanthropy. We can't just assume that wealth and good deeds automatically means someone is ethical.
This case has brought to light this whole network of individuals linked to Epstein, some closer than others. How to figure out who was actively part of his criminal activities and who might have just been associated with him without knowing what was going on.
That's a tough one. And the answer might depend on the specific person and their level of involvement with Epstein. The documents give us some hints, things like flight logs and communication records, but it's important to avoid jumping to conclusions without solid evidence.
So we need to be careful and nuanced when we assess the connections between these people and Epstein.
Exactly. We have to resist that urge to judge too quickly and let the investigations play out without bias or speculation.
This brings up another point.
Yeah.
The possibility of defamation lawsuits in cases like this.
Yeah.
How do those legal things play out?
Defamation cases, those are complicated, especially when you're talking about public figures. The burden of proof is really high, and you have to balance free speech with protecting someone's reputation.
So it's not always just about proving if something is true or false.
Right. The context, the intent, the potential for harm, all those things matter in defamation cases. And in a case this big, the legal stakes are even higher.
It's a reminder that legal proceedings can take a long time, they're complicated, and it's important to let the process work before we jump to any conclusions.
Absolutely. We need to be patient and let the legal system do its job while also staying alert and holding those in power accountable.
The Epstein case has really shaken a lot of people's faith in institutions, systems that are supposed to protect us. What can we do to rebuild that trust and make sure something like this doesn't happen again?
That's the big question. We need real changes, real reforms in our legal system, law enforcement, and social institutions to stop this kind of abuse of power from happening again. This means stronger protections for vulnerable people, tougher penalties for those who commit these crimes, and a culture that values transparency and accountability.
It's also about empowering people to speak up, to report abuse, knowing they'll be believed and supported.
Right. Creating that kind of culture where victims feel safe coming forward, that's essential to stopping this cycle of abuse and making sure the abusers are held responsible.
The Epstein case has been a real wake-up call for many people, showing this dark side of wealth, power, and privilege. It's a story that's still unfolding, and it's clear that there are still so many questions unanswered and a long way to go in getting justice for the victims. It feels like we've just scratched the surface here. This is a really complex case. So where do we go from here? What's next in finding out the whole truth and holding people accountable?
That's the question, isn't it? Releasing these documents has definitely reignited public interest, put it back under the microscope. I think we'll see more investigations, both from law enforcement and journalists doing their own digging.
Do you think we'll see more charges against those people named in the files?
It's possible, yeah. But we have to remember the bar for criminal charges is high. Investigators need solid proof of wrongdoing, which is tough when you're dealing with complicated finances and these, powerful networks.
So it's not just about names being in a document. It's got to be directly connected to a crime.
Right. Knowing Epstein, being associated with him, that's not enough to bring charges. They need clear evidence of being involved in something illegal.
This case has also made people think about, the responsibility of any institutions or organizations that might have been tied to Epstein somehow. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a valid point. There have been cases where institutions, maybe they knew, maybe they didn't, but they facilitated or enabled his behavior in some way. It's really important for those places to do some serious soul searching. Internal reviews take steps to fix whatever systemic issues contributed to this happening.
So looking at themselves, honestly, admitting where they went wrong.
Yeah, and then actually taking action to prevent this kind of thing in the future. Stronger vetting processes, clearer ethics rules, and a culture that's all about transparency and accountability.
This whole thing's been a wake-up call, making us face some hard truths about the abuse of power and how those systems stay in place. What do you think the lasting impact of this case will be on society?
I think it'll have a big impact, a lasting one, on how we think about wealth, power, and accountability. It's exposed how vulnerable our institutions can be and how people with a ton of resources can take advantage of that for their own benefit.
It's also shown how important it is to be responsible as individuals and to have the courage to stand up to injustice, even when it's scary.
Absolutely. The courage of the victims to come forward knowing they'll be under so much pressure, facing scrutiny, it's truly inspiring. Their stories have brought this awful truth to light, and their strength, it's amazing. It's a testament to what humans can overcome.
This has been, unsettling but incredibly important to discuss. Any final thoughts for our listeners as they try to make sense of this case and everything it means?
I'd say stay engaged with this story. It's not over. Look for trustworthy sources, be critical of what you see and hear, and talk about the issues this case raises. Most importantly, don't forget the victims, their stories. Let their courage inspire us to build a world where justice wins and people are held accountable.
We've covered a lot today, haven't we? The Epstein Files, what they mean legally and for society, and the importance of taking responsibility, both as individuals and within institutions. If you found this deep dive helpful, let us know what you think and if you have any questions. We always love to hear your suggestions for future deep dives, topics you care about. So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.